Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
I'm Seth,
I'm Ariana.
and this is the new episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. A little later, we will be talking about an indie film that has been recently released called Good One. But first, we're going to be talking about the big horror smash of the year that I think kind of surprised a lot of people, The Substance. Elizabeth Sparkle, renowned for an aerobics show, faces a devastating blow on her 50th birthday as her boss fires her. Amid her distress, a laboratory offers her a substance which promises to transform her into an enhanced version of herself. So, Ariana, had you heard much about this movie before we sat down and watched it?
I heard that it was one of the few, not one of the few, one of those body horror films that actually was more about feminism than people were willing to admit. Or that men
Well, I
were
think
shocked
people
by.
were openly admitting.
Or also like that men were shocked by.
I did see, I think on Google reviews, it has a 2.9 out of 5. And over on Letterboxd, it's like I think at least like a 3.9 or something.
Yeah,
And before it got super popular, it was over 4 stars, yeah. And so I think what you were talking about, men who realized what the movie was about, were like, no, I hate this movie. So it is from Corley Farhit, I think is how you pronounce her name. And we had seen a movie from her previously, Revenge.
Yes.
Which was, as the title suggests, a sort of revenge. I guess it was horror, but there was no monster supernatural elements. That one starred Matilda Lutz as the lead character, a woman who she's like a mistress, I think. She was having an affair, and the guy she's having an affair with is doing some criminal shit, which she overhears. So then he and his guys decide that they have to kill her. And then it's her kind of getting her revenge after they leave her for dead.
Yeah.
And so that movie stood out to me for how stylish it was.
Yeah, and it was a movie that could have easily been a hoax kind of movie or like, horror comedy kind of situation. But it really does like establish yourself of going, okay, you see this young woman from the outside, but you don't really know her. So
we don't know what she's capable of.
Exactly.
And so we're kind of in the shoes of the bad guys, and that we just think, oh, she's just some like pretty woman, and that's it. I want to say in that movie, she doesn't ingest some sort of drug that they have that's like a amphetamine or cocaine or something. Because I do think like the movie takes on a slightly altered kind of like intensity at the end.
Well, I think it also had to do with like how much the adrenaline that was running through her system.
Well, I think it was like that was to keep her awake despite she was like bleeding out, because she gets pretty fucked up in that movie.
Yeah.
So back to The Substance. This is a more overt horror science fiction kind of movie.
Yes.
It has fantastical elements in it, which we'll talk a little bit about. I felt that the themes in this movie, that was the weak point for me. Not that the themes were what they were, but the movie was very on the nose about them. I felt like there wasn't a lot of subtlety in how it handled what it was trying to talk about. Like it was very on the nose.
That's the weird thing. Like for this film, I don't want it to be subtle. I don't, because it's like the gore is so in your face that you're kind of like, if you miss the point, then you are, I guess I'm just going to be like, you're not a person that's reading into the film.
But but what you're saying is, but like, it isn't that though. It's a movie that tells you what it's about directly. And that is kind of, I don't really like that aspect of movies, because I would rather, when we'll talk about this with Good One, which I think is a movie that respects the hell out of its audience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this movie put in some, I don't know what you would call them, but put in some assurances that there'd be no way that the audience would miss the point.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of think that's a weakness of the movie. It doesn't ruin the movie for me, and it didn't make me like not enjoy the movie.
Yeah.
I just realized like, oh yeah, I wish they just like hadn't been so on the nose about what they were trying to say.
Yeah.
Like, I'm smart enough, I can get it. And I think most people are smart enough
Yeah.
that they would get it and you wouldn't have to be that overt.
Yeah, I think this film was almost a reaction of sorts to that one like body horror film. It was like from that French director that you really loved. That had to do with like the car and the
Oh, to Tane, no, this was not a response
no,
to
I
that.
don't think it's like a response, like being like a direct response. I mean, like to me, it felt like
A
this.
continuation of those ideas and
Yeah,
themes.
it's
Okay.
like she saw that film and went like, "Ooh, this is the right time to actually go as hard as I want to, at least visually."
I don't
Because
think so.
visually, there's just some parts that it was just kind of like squirming, hard to look
But
at.
that's just like a trope of the body horror
Yeah,
genre, right? So like I think they're both body horror movies, and I wouldn't be surprised if Coralie Fairheat has seen Julia Ducournau's films, but I'm like, this is a very different kind of movie. This is more like a, I'm not going to say like a wide audience, but at least a broader audience than
yeah.
Titan. Like Titan is not going to appeal to a broad audience because it expects you to do some work while you
Yeah,
watch
and
it.
this film felt almost as in the niche of like the 1990s, early 2000s. You would find this movie on cable, or you went to go rent a film and you just didn't really read the, like, you got a vague sense of what it was,
Mhm.
and that it would have been more of a cult classic.
Yeah, it definitely has
Like
those
even
vibes.
the like I do find, like, for example, the aesthetics, we talked about this when we're watching the film, how it's a very 80s slash 90s aesthetics, all while also having cell phones, flat TVs. Like
Yeah.
she has an old school vacuum.
Yeah, it feels more yeah, mixed kind of I guess eras is what you would
Yes.
say. And so I guess in that way it does kind of feel modern. Uh so when you think about like the cast of the movie, it was surprisingly small.
Yeah.
I would say other than like a few, I mean, we have Dennis Quaid showing up a few times as the boss, like the head of the network. And you have a couple other roles that might pop up more than once, but it really is Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. Like
Yeah.
they are the movie.
And I think that's one thing that I kind of appreciate about the film. At no point do we have, ooh, Sue, played by Margaret Qualley, has a love interest. Like, we don't need to see that. We don't need to see her like fall in, like the huge dilemma between them is the fact that they are sharing this time, and how one ends up abusing the other while the other wants at least like to just be like, hey, there was a deal that was made and we're supposed to follow the deal as is.
But I'm gonna remind you of what the laboratory says. You are the same.
Yeah, you
So
are one.
there is no there's while they are two different bodies, there aren't two different characters. This is a character versus themselves.
Well, I think it also is a strange thing of just viewing it as when we think about communities, or even like what it's supposed to be, a stronger sisterhood apparently amongst women, um how we beat each other down, right? And I did like the whole thing of just being like, yeah, you're both supposed to be one person. And there are a few shots like towards the end, I thought, like Sue, where when she really goes to the extreme, where she stops herself and is like, oh shit.
Well, I don't even think the sisterhood thing is a part of it. I think the when I was watching this movie, I think it is a deeply introspective movie about one person,
Mhm.
right? So I don't even think it because like she doesn't really interact with any other women in any meaningful way. This is all about her. It's about
Yeah.
what's going on inside of her. And so I think it's more there's a lot more psychological stuff going on here.
Mhm.
It's more about like neuroses and self-loathing
Yeah.
and punishing yourself because no one's making her do this. This is her choice the entire time. You can now we could also argue, well, she came up in a society in which she has no value because of her age, and therefore she's doing this to try to create new value for herself.
Mhm.
But like taking the substance, no one ever like other than the male nurse who offers her like the first contact.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't have to buy it.
No, she doesn't have to proceed with it. It's just the idea if I was younger and prettier, I could get the things that I want. Not knowing that maybe like this is a time to not focus on your career, focus on other things. But like you said, it's within a society that has attributed that her value is only supposed to be like sexy and pretty.
But then again, she's wrong
Yeah, she
because,
is
well,
wrong.
because of, and I think it's something that I didn't really think about until a few days after watching the movie, the old school friend that she runs into,
Hmm.
who she sets a date up with as her old self. And that is a sign that, once again, I think a lot of this is in her head. She's making a lot of assumptions, I think mainly because of the industry that she works in, of how many people see the world through that lens.
Yeah.
But I think the film also presents Harvey, who is like our one major industry contact,
Hmm.
as someone who is not normal himself, who is weird,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of, in that it's a bit more subtle, because then when you compare Harvey to Oliver, her school friend, I believe that's Oliver was his name. Uh, Oliver seems normal and pleasant and someone you wouldn't mind being around.
Yeah.
Harvey is disgusting
Yeah, there's an
and
emphasis to
foul.
constantly like be like he is a gross human being. Like the close-ups on his mouth, like the fact that like a lot of times he's eating or smoking and then
The fact they cast Dennis Quaid, who is a
yeah.
scumbag
Yes.
in that role. Uh, and so that's where I feel like some of the nuance is that Elizabeth is kind of making a choice that she would rather be in this world of the grotesque than she would just like normal people and just like letting herself age and living life.
It's just sort of like when you think about like social media or the how we consume contact like content, and we also view about the fact of like it's always like the new young hot thing, or just being like constantly talking about how a rich woman is going to the lengths that they need to in order to stay young and beautiful. The one remark that keeps echoing in my head as like we're talking about this film is one time Kim Kardashian said that if she had to eat shit every day
Mhm.
to stay young, she would. Which is like, how fucked up is that? Like, not to allow yourself to age, not to allow yourself
But
to,
I think we need to unpack that even more
yeah.
because the question is, what is it you get out of not aging? Because I've come to a point where I've found, well, I think everybody should age for one simple reason. It is what we do. And so the question would be, well, what does she get from not aging?
I think it is also just like a sexist trope that she's putting on herself without even saying it out loud. As men grow older, like, yeah, your hair changes, like, they'll call you a silver fox. A woman starts to age and not allow herself to dye her hair. She's making herself look older when she doesn't necessarily have to.
Well,
Like,
I think men are allowed to age more than women.
mhm,
However, to be an attractive older man, there is a very narrow space that you can fit
yeah,
into. So, like, if you're overweight and balding and you're a man, I think you are going to be thrown into the same category as like an aging woman, right?
yeah,
It's you think about someone like Dennis Quaid, who is in his 60s pushing 70s,
yeah,
and like he does not look like he's in his 60s pushing 70s.
no,
He is also like that's where I think for a long time, I think it was just women that were subject to a lot of the beauty garbage and still are for the majority. But I do see it creeping into like masculine spaces, right?
yeah.
These sort of the way a male body should look, the way, like a man who wears glasses among a certain group of men, like we've regressed back to this kind of like, oh, he's lame looking or
Well,
something.
it's like this thing of it being like, okay, so men can, to a certain degree, allow themselves to look schlubby, overweight, or whatever. But, if that guy is still getting his bag, then he can get whatever woman he wants,
Well,
right?
then we're going into something else, which is what we're talking about is capitalism.
Yes.
And so it's that the money is the motivator of all of this.
Yes.
And so it's the reason why women are like the reason why Elizabeth in this movie is trying to look young is partially because she's living a certain lifestyle. Well, but at the same time, I'm like, well, didn't she invest her money? So then, because I think it's such a compulsion that's so alien to me of probably because I'm an autistic person who doesn't like to be noticed, that like that she would go to these extreme lengths just so she could be seen by the world, but like the
Well, also
world,
putting
but
herself
the
in,
world being presented here is so like exaggeratedly grotesque that
yeah.
it makes you go, why would you like? Yeah, of course I would withdraw from that world. It's too much. It's too
Well, it's
intense.
like how it's like in a sense of viewing of someone who is capitalized on their body and on their beauty. And I do find it very interesting that like it is also a movie that is so focused on her career, right? At no point, which I found very interesting about this film, does Elizabeth or Sue have conversations with women outside, like we never witness it. We don't see them have best friends. We don't see them texting anybody. We don't like the first time we see Elizabeth, it's supposed to be her fucking birthday.
Which she gets fired on.
And
Yeah,
she gets fired on, but there's no one like that trope of having like her sassy best friend there.
I'm glad they didn't have that
They
trope.
I'm glad that they didn't. It's just this interesting perspective of she has been putting everything in this. And I'm not saying like, oh, well, if she had been married and had children, maybe she would like, no, it's just
Well, I think her isolation is part of what makes the horror work. Like from
exactly.
and also from like a practical point of view, this body swapping, if you threw in like a regular partner or kids, it becomes more complicated and then it becomes almost like a sitcom.
Yeah.
So I think making her single while also having like thematic uh resonance, it also makes the story work better.
And it is this thing of like what happens to people when they do not have a fucking support system and all they've been doing is grinding and hustling and that's all they fucking love at the end of the day.
What did you think of Demi Moore's performance? When I think about Demi Moore, I realize I really haven't seen a lot of movies she was in. Like the movies she was in were kind of a little too rough when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And then when I got old enough, I just really didn't have any interest because the things I've heard is they're not very good either. Like,
Like yeah, and then she like kind of went on a hiatus. She was on that movie Please Baby Please.
now
Uh
you're stumping me.
Good.
Please, have I seen this movie?
Yeah, it was a very gay like Cola Scola is in that film. I think like they helped write it at some point.
Oh, I didn't. She was in that movie?
Yeah, she's the neighbor upstairs.
Oh, it's not a very big
No, it's
part.
not
That's
a
why.
big
But yeah,
part.
now that I look, yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
1 point for Ariana.
and
Not that we're
and what's
keeping
on my
track.
scoreboard?
I don't know,
Like,
probably infinite.
yeah. I mean, I can have you.
It's probably marked a
I'm
touchdown.
okay letting you have a point. That's okay. I'm not gonna feel like I have a dearth of points. Yeah, I thought she was very effective. I think the best scene for me with her is when she's has the date set up and then she kind of has a mental breakdown in the
Oh,
bathroom. Just because it was the strongest performance I've seen from her.
yeah.
And it felt like she was really digging into probably some real emotions, but
Yeah.
also once again, like we have to remind ourselves, actors are actors for a reason, is they're good at pretending. So I think she was able to access probably some memory she had from being in the industry, but she was also able to just be this character.
I mean, like, here's the thing. I've had those moments where I've just gotten dressed up and ready to go someplace and not feel attractive and just canceled.
Is that why you've
And
been with me?
I mean, you would probably not allow that to happen, but
No,
it's just like it's happened. Like if I'm gonna go hang out with friends, uh, one time like we were gonna go to a wedding and I had an anxiety attack, like while driving there,
I have
and
no memory of this.
yeah, and I just part of it was I felt like I looked ridiculous. Like I just realized, like I was just like I'm gonna look fat and stupid out there. Why am I doing this to myself? Uh I've like, for example, skipped classes because I felt that way. And it's just like it was also hard because you think like Demi Moore, even though like yeah, she's 61 playing 50, she's still kind of like she still looks great. but she's
But I
like,
mean, it's clear she's had some surgery.
yeah, but she's like putting on these clothes, and suddenly you can tell she's reapplying the makeup. And I feel like it does not matter your age. We've all gone through it. And it's also like this devastation of when you go through it as you're getting older, you start wondering, like, when the fuck does this stop? When does this insecurity just go away? And you know very well that it's partly because of like what you're consuming online or what you see online or how you see other people, that you feel like they're so effortless. But like, why can't I be that way?
Well, you just have to call the number for the substance and then you can do it. Uh, Margaret Qualley, what did you think of her performance in this movie?
She like was in, like, it's completely different from anything else that I've seen her.
I think she may be my like favorite like up and coming. Is she or she has she already come?
I,
That sounded bad.
I
Is
think
she here? Has she arrived?
like, this is probably the year that will probably films that none of her families can go see.
Because yeah, she has a great bit. If you everybody out there listening looks it up from Seth Meyers,
No, I think it's like
Jimmy
Jimmy
Kimmel.
Fallon,
Yeah, Jimmy Fallon.
who we so adore.
Ugh. And she's talking about the three movies she had come out this year, which are Drive Away Dolls, uh, the Kinds of Kindness,
Yeah.
and The Substance, and how all three are movies that no one from her family or close friends from when she was a child should go see. Because it was
Unless
Andy McDowell, her mother saw Drive Away Dolls, and apparently came out and was like, Mary Margaret, no one can say that movie. That's the way she does. Like you have to see Margaret Qualley tell the story yourself because she's so charming, like charming to a point where I'm like, this is fucking ridiculous.
like the thing is, like, you can tell this is probably who she is, but it just comes off
It,
like she's having a private
if this
conversation.
isn't who she is, then she is a great phony
Yeah.
because it feels very authentic when you see these interviews with her, and she's
Her mother's accent is so great. And
and
like
then her childhood babysitter saw The Substance
the nanny.
and just like apparently said, I'm gonna pray for you, Mary Margaret. Who she went to church with. I think she was like her Sunday school teacher or something.
She
Yeah.
was her nanny, and then her son, like,
Yeah.
who would take her to go to church.
Uh,
And then she begged her dad when he was like, "Oh, me and my friends are gonna go watch Kinds of Kindness," and she just told him like, "Don't do it, don't do
just don't save it. Uh, but yeah, I think Margaret Qualley should be cast as a villain because in The Substance, she essentially is. And I think she did an incredible job of playing a truly terrifying villain.
Yes, and it was like not, it's like it's not as if she's like delivering like whippy insults.
It's the intensity.
It's, yes, it is. And it's also like I said, when she goes ballistic and then it's sort of like, oh shit, like the moment of regret and then realizing it's too late. And it's the extremes that she would go through while also just being like, when you think about, like, she's supposed to be the better version
Mm.
of Elizabeth, and you almost want to be like, Elizabeth, what did you do to get your job?
Well, I think it's also, I think that's an interesting thing because it does give you backstory on Elizabeth because you see the kind of person she likely was coming up.
Yeah.
And you kind of realize that your sympathy for her does diminish a bit because you're like, you were like a fucking horrible person.
Like, if this is the better version
Yeah.
of you,
Or if this is what you were like back then.
yeah, and I think it's just also how, like, even though they keep trying to remind both these beings that they are one, that they depend on each other, it's this interesting thing that, like, any harm that Elizabeth can do to Sue,
They basically, it's reciprocal harm.
yeah,
If you hurt one of them enough, it starts to hurt the other.
yes, and it's like this thing where, like, oh, Elizabeth doesn't want to go as far because she looks at Sue and is like, but she's so young and beautiful. I have to let her be.
But also not realizing it's you. Like
Yeah.
their consciousness is being exchanged between forms. And when the consciousness is not there, there's no one there until a certain point in the movie, which I think is where things get very interesting. I do think the last 30 minutes of this movie, while both being an incredible display of body horror, is also where the movie was way too on the nose for me.
Yeah.
Where I was like, I get it.
Yeah,
I get it. I get it.
Is like the part that I wish they had edited out, despite the fact that I had a lot of fun with
I mean,
it.
body horror as a genre is about excess.
Yeah.
But I do think the movie, like, you could have pulled back just a hair and like nailed the landing rather than kind of like stumbled
Yeah,
over the finish line.
like it's the point that it felt like a it just it felt like a horror story that would have come from elsewhere. Like someone wrote a fanfic from the film and someone just stapled it on. And like,
It felt like, to me, it felt like a really good horror short story
yeah,
turned into a feature film
yeah, that's
because of the small cast and that everything was very focused. There were no subplots in this movie.
no.
This movie had a plot, and that was what it followed the entire time. And it's 2 hours and 20 minutes long. So
Wow, I didn't
it
realize.
didn't feel
No,
long.
it didn't.
Yeah.
Like even with the last piece being what it was, like the critique is just it was basically it was not necessary. I could have just been happy with what we
Well, like,
had.
it just felt like there were, while the film does seem to exist in a slightly surreal world, there were certain things she was able to do in the end that I just thought like, and no one from point A to point B stopped you. It's so obvious that something is like wrong. There's no way anyone could look at you and not go, "Oh, what the fuck?" And like the obliviousness of everyone around her was just where I felt like, how much of this is really happening? How much of this is happening in her head?
Yeah.
And so I think that's maybe where there's some things that happen at the end that are actually going on in her mind as she's breaking down. That's the only way it would like make sense to me
Yeah.
that she could pull that off. Uh the I thought the body horror, some of the best body horror I've ever seen in my life. And this is a perfect use of computer generated effects.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, when I see them used, it's unnecessary. A practical effect could do the same thing. This is where, yeah, but then I love that they also do use practical makeup effects. The
Yeah.
transformations, like the things that you literally could not do practically, they use CG for, and it works.
Yeah.
And then the moment that it's something that could be done practically, they switch back to that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think Coralie Farragut so far, two very interesting takes on horror. I'm curious to know. I know she's done at least one other feature film, Reality Plus is the name of it.
Okay.
I don't know much about it, but I'd be willing to watch it. I am wondering, like, what does she do next? Because one thing I think was interesting is this was Mubi was involved in the production of this movie,
Okay.
and I've noticed they were involved in it's not Challengers. It was the movie. It's a one-word title.
Queer?
No, I think they were doing Queer, yeah. But I'm talking. We've seen this movie. It was the one about the three people, the two men and the woman that were in a relationship, and Adele Archeolopoulos, whatever Snuffleupagus, whatever her name is, the German guy with the hair lip. And it was like one word, and I can't think of what it is for the life of me. It was just like, duh.
All I can think is like one movie that has nothing to do with it because of the like other
Passengers.
Yeah,
Passengers. Yeah, Passengers. And I know that movie produced that. So they're being very, it feels kind of A24-ish,
Yeah.
where they're picking very interesting movies to put their name on. And I also wonder what Coralie Farragut does next, because like The Substance has been a massive hit.
Mm-hmm.
It's even like domestically in the States, which is a big thing. So she's clearly going to get an offer from someone to do something. I just hope that I don't hold out much hope for this, that studios will return to that point they were in the 70s where they're like, hey, let's just let the people who make the movies because they're making money.
Yeah, I think it's just I mean there are a few I feel like Ari Aster has broken that a little bit, but we don't know what projects are going to be thrown at her for her to say yes to, and
so far she's done a pretty good job of choosing what she wants to do. And I think
Yeah.
she wrote the screenplay for this, or at least co-wrote it. And so, yeah, I'm very interested to see what she does next. During a weekend backpacking trip in the Catskills, 17-year-old Sam navigates the clash of egos between her father and his oldest friend. This is the film Good One from writer-director India Donaldson. So Ariana, this movie, we were talking before about the substance, and I was talking about how it was very overt in its themes.
Yeah.
It was very on the nose. I think Good One is a perfect counter example to that, in my opinion, in that it is nuanced with what it's talking about, yet it still communicates its point.
Mhm.
What did you think about Good One?
I thought it was very well acted.
It was
Uh,
a good one, wasn't it?
I'm gonna be leaving the podcast. Excuse me. No, it was blah, blah, blah. It was a well done film. It still leaves you with some questions afterwards as to what was the wrap up, but it's that it's this understanding that like Sam is uncomfortable, yet she is trying to make the best of it. And that is something that is absent within her father's view.
I think girl Lily Coleus, who plays Sam,
Mm,
only 19 years old. Incredible performance.
yeah.
Uh, she's helped by a lot of technical aspects, and we'll talk about those. But just her performance on its own was very subtle and I'm using the word again, nuanced.
Mhm.
There are multiple points in this story where she is trying to express her discomfort to her father, but trying to do so in a tactful way
Mhm.
and is not being listened to. And I think that's kind of the core of what this movie's about. It is about a young woman who is trying to express discomfort, trying to set boundaries, and she's surrounded by men who will not listen to her.
Yeah.
Because the first incident of that is the backstory there, her dad, Chris, played by character actor James LaGrosse, who we've seen in tons of stuff.
Yeah.
I've never seen him star in anything, but he's one of those guys that he will act the hell out of a supporting role.
Yeah.
Uh, he divorced Sam's mom, right? And he's remarried and they have a baby.
Yes.
And so this appears to have been a tradition that he's done with Sam and then his friend Matt and Matt's son Dylan. I'm thinking like going back to when they were kids, probably. And because the teenagers are both approaching, graduation age,
Going to college soon.
yeah, that this is probably like the last time they're going to do this because she's 17. By the next summer, she's going to be getting ready for college, kind of a thing. And I think he does well. The writer director India Donaldson wrote the film and then put it away, and then she got pregnant and had a child, and then she took the script back out. And she said when she took the script back out, she started to have much more empathy for Chris and Matt, the dads. And
Okay.
she said, I wanted to ensure that this was a film about empathy. And I think she did an excellent job in that no one feels like a villain.
No.
People make big mistakes, but they're not mistakes you couldn't fix if you really put in the effort.
Hmm.
And we'll probably talk about that a little later for people that want to avoid spoilers. But I think every character here feels human,
Yes.
and every situation that's uncomfortable feels like, yeah, there really isn't an easy way to like deal with this. It's kind of you have to dive headfirst into the discomfort and just get through it.
Hmm.
And that's something that Chris just won't do. The when they show up to pick up Matt's arguing with Dylan, and Dylan goes back in the house and slams the door. And Sam offers to go talk to Dylan because without Dylan, it makes it two dads and a 17-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And Matt, Dylan's father, just kind of like poo-poos that idea and is just like, no, it'd be good to like get away from him. But neither dad thinks about Sam
Yeah, and
and
they're
her
also
comfort.
not thinking about Dylan, even though Dylan has said he doesn't want to do it, because then there's the following implications that um Matt is going through a divorce, so it means that he was at Dylan's home and now he is home alone without his dad.
Well, it was, yeah, Dylan was in Matt's house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so even though yes, the age to be alone at home like is beyond it's like
But it's sort of like, but this is also the last summer you're going to get to do this. So why don't you, Matt, the father, the adult,
yeah.
just try to mend the fences here just so that your son gets to have this? But instead, Matt is making it all about himself.
Yes.
And he needs to get away from this kid that's driving him up the wall. A little later, when they're out in the woods, they come across a group of three guys. And I love how the movie keeps us in this ambiguous space of we're really not sure. Are these guys ill-intentioned? There's lots of like just shots of people looking at each other and then cutting to someone's reaction shot of watching them. And the film never explicitly tells you what anyone's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, there's this just wonderful tension in the movie that you start to feel. And what's happening is Donaldson is putting you in Sam's shoes.
Yeah.
You start to feel the tension that Sam feels. It's not overwhelming, but it's constantly there kind of poking at you.
It's the beginning sensations of feeling unsafe.
Yeah. And like realizing you're not being listened to
Mm-hmm.
because the three guys decide to set up their camp like meters away from Sam and her dad and Matt's. And she quietly tells her dad, like, oh, are they gonna camp here too? Without explicitly saying, I don't like that, but it's implied, right? And even her father knows that because he responds with, it'll be fine, just it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think it's also just this indication that like in camp rules, you just don't really camp that close to
Yeah,
another
yeah.
group.
But then eventually we see these three guys are just kind of idiots
Yeah.
and don't really have any ill-intended agenda, but there is a lot of like them looking at Sam and then like Sam looking at them.
Yeah.
And there is this tension because they're both, dudes in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
She's maybe they're like, was she in college? Like they don't know, but they don't do anything. And you keep expecting that they might do something,
Yeah.
and they don't. And then the thing happens. And it's about maybe 25 minutes left in the movie.
Yes.
And so it's an hour and 30-minute movie. And I love that. I'm trying to look at my notes here. That it lures us in with easygoing vibes and then turns it all on its head. But then it still doesn't lose its empathy, though.
Yeah.
It still remains a very human-centered movie. What did you think of how that moment was played out? And of the performances, too.
The performances were very well done. They're like you really don't know if it's regret or the injury of just kind of being denied is the result as to why like someone ends up cowering a little bit.
I
It's
think there was genuine shame, though. I think it
yeah.
was the immediate realization of who you were talking to.
Yeah. And there I think to me the biggest more point of tension was when Sam tries to bring it up to her dad.
Yeah, and I felt like, yeah, that was kind of the thing that takes her over the edge, so to say,
Yeah.
where she just realizes, oh, now I get it.
Yeah, where it is she is trying to do it in a moment of humor because she finally feels like she's safe. She's in a good moment with her dad that she's not going to make him super mad only to realize, oh, you're not. And then the moment that she realizes you're not understanding what I'm telling you.
But
And
then
the moment he does understand,
but he is. That's the thing.
but it's or she also just clarifies it
Yeah.
and makes it
She's giving
known
him the benefit of the doubt that he
like
doesn't
she
understand.
was
Yeah.
deeply like uncomfortable. There is this like microsecond where you think he's going to console her and then just kind of goes, "Can we just have a good day?"
Yeah. And I think for her, that was the moment where she probably already, I mean, she's 17 years old. She lives in New York City. she knows how bad men can be.
Yeah.
But I think that was the moment where it was her father, someone who she probably has at least some respect for, maybe not total.
Yeah.
She just loses it right there. And it's just
Yeah.
kind of like, you're just going to be another asshole like
And
every other
it's like
asshole.
throughout the film, Sam is constantly praised by Matt, being like, she's so smart, she's so great. How did you get a great kid? And Chris is like, I just tried not to fuck her up. As if like Sam has already made all the decisions she needed to make in her life.
Yeah.
As if Sam will never fuck up. As if like um Sam is not allowed to fuck up, even though there is moments that she's just sort of like trying to explain to Matt about Dylan's side. She's like, because Matt's going through a divorce, and she's like, you need to understand that Dylan is trying to protect his mom. You have to be kinder, because Chris is quick, like her dad is quick to be like, shit happens.
Well,
Because
he's
it's like,
still sore from his own divorce.
and like because of the divorce, he's kind of like, it just happens. And she's like, divorce doesn't just happen just to you.
Yeah, the kids go through the
Like
divorce
she
too.
went through the divorce. And there's also like how she kind of pokes fun at her dad, because I think there's almost like this indication that her dad didn't want this new baby. It just happened to him.
Well, because it was a new younger wife
Because like
and they weren't
yeah,
using protection and
and
now
it
there's
was,
a baby.
well, it was also because like he was fucking around with someone who's at like was 25, and then now that she got into her 30s, she wanted to do adult
Yeah.
things, and how
Have babies
like,
and
and
do that.
now like, you don't want to lose her, because you're kind of like, well, you were fucking with her since she was 25, and you were like that creepy old man, and you guys say that you love each other, but this is what it is. um how like Sam doesn't have a lot of empathy for her dad when it comes to the dissatisfaction that he may feel about his life.
But then
This
he doesn't have much empathy for her either.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's a sad thing, because it's just sort of like he's asking, after she reveals this moment of vulnerability, can't we just have a good day? What you're saying to that person is, swallow your pain so I can be comfortable.
Yeah. Which I realized what one thing this movie is about listening to others versus listening to yourself,
Yeah.
which is something that like as an autistic person is always a struggle because I'll feel something internally is off, but everyone around me is saying it's okay, and only to turn out that like, oh yeah, that was a bad situation. I should have listened to myself.
Yeah.
Whether that's like things I'm feeling in my own body or just like a situation that doesn't feel right, kind of a
Hmm.
thing. And I think you see that in Sam, this constant pushing down of her own self talking to her in favor of, well, got to keep the guys happy, got to make sure the day is nice.
Yeah.
Um, the so India Donaldson, I saw an interview with her, and she was talking about influences for this movie.
Hmm.
And one of the people she cited as being an influence of this movie, which is the first time I've seen this person cited in that way, because they're still a working director who I feel has a very long career ahead of them. Kelly Reichardt.
Which I'm not surprised, because James, he was in her last film.
Oh yeah,
He
and
was one of the professors.
yeah. Didn't he play them? Was he the main character's dad?
No, he was like one of the professors at the art school.
Okay. Uh,
'Cause I
so
remember you saw him in the background, and you were like, "That's
that's the
James."
James LeGros. So she mentioned specifically Old Joy.
Oh yeah, you can totally like, especially because this has to do with like going out into nature.
And so in that movie, we have, two old friends who have been apart for a while, who go camping, and it's in nature that they kind of come to realize the gap that's between them now
Hmm.
and the tension that exists between them. Uh, and so I could definitely see that here. Also, in the way Kelly Reichardt is very trusting of her audience.
Yeah.
She doesn't feel a need to over explicate things. She is okay. I was thinking of like Wendy and Lucy as a great example of that, of a movie that just lets moments happen and lets the actors play things very naturalistically. And in turn, it grounds the audience in the reality of that film.
Yeah.
Because no one is, you take something like the substance of the movie, you're never going to be grounded in the reality of, and that's intentional, right? It's meant to
Yeah.
be a hyper real, intense kind of, going off the rails kind of movie. This is very measured and very controlled, and every shot is so thoughtful. One of the things that stood out for me here is the cinematography.
Oh yeah, like when they would just go from sunlight to shadow, it felt like you were watching animation of sorts because the coloring was so precise and so good that you could just watch them hiking all day.
There's a perfect moment in this movie where Sam wakes up and she has her tent unzipped and is sitting in the entrance, and she's wearing a red long sleeve shirt. And then the tent is red, and the interior of the tent is also red, but each red is a different tone of red.
Hmm.
And then I think there's like a black accent in there. And it's just from like a visual color composition point of view, it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you're like, this would make a perfect photo. It makes a perfect moment in a shot in like a movie. It's just so well composed. Um, it reminded me a bit of the writing of Raymond Carver, who I don't think you've read any of his work. He's considered like a very premier kind of the American kind of short story, at least kind of post World War II. He's not everyone's cup of tea. And there's some stories of his I've read and they fall flat for me. And then other stuff just really resonates. But his storytelling is very often a character just kind of doing a task. And for most of the story, nothing's really happening. And then there's like a moment. And then everything turns on that moment. A bunch of his stories were adapted for Robert Altman's movie Shortcuts.
Okay.
And then there was an Australian film we saw that was from the director of Lantania. Uh, and it had Gabriel Byrne in it. And it was the men went out fishing and they found the dead
Oh
body.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there was a lot added to the story for that film, but the men going out and finding a dead girl like floating down the river, that's from a Raymond Carver short story,
Okay.
like that premise. And this felt very similar in that it was about bringing us into this character's mind and this like place in nature, and then letting a moment happen near the end of the story, which is also a very Carver thing to do, and leaving you with kind of lots of questions. Because what's happened is you understand this character very well. And now this character has come up against a pretty heavy thing. And then the story just ends.
Yeah.
And the point is that now you walk away and you think about that and you think about what would that character do? What would I do if I was in that character's situation? Or what do I think I would do in that character's situation versus what would I probably actually do, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and then there's some interesting visual uh, things here because the film opens with a shot of where we're going,
Yeah.
which is there's this kind of creek, and along the creek, people have come along and built these kind of stone plinths. I guess these little like stacked rocks
Yeah.
that are balanced. And the end of the movie brings us to that place. And the end of the movie also involves the visual of a rock being set down, like the very last shot of the movie.
Yeah.
And I know you had said aloud that you were kind of wondering what that meant, what
Yes.
that was about. You want to talk about that in any way?
I mean, the first idea that it came is when you go to like a Jewish cemetery, you are supposed to leave a stone to indicate that you remember the person and that you were there.
Mhm.
Also to let other people like know, hey, people still visit this grave stone. I don't know if it was also an indication that like maybe he was carrying a rock to hit his
Yeah, I kind of wondered about that too.
like that he got so because like when because the whole thing it's supposed to be Sam goes ahead to the car.
because she's just so fed up.
She's fed up. And her when they finally do arrive, it's this interesting thing like Matt is lingering in the background. He's not coming forward like he's not doing that like, hey, don't be
Yeah.
mad at her.
He's on his phone a lot.
Yeah. And so it's just like this indication that he knows he fucked something up, so he's not even going to try to talk.
Mhm.
And you would think that Chris, her father, would be more explosive. Like, I didn't know where you were. I didn't know if you were gonna make it. Da, da, da.
But like he knew.
But it's also like there were so many remarks and saying like Sam is the most proficient one amongst all of them to do hiking and camping.
Like she won't get lost.
Because like she's shown like a natural ability in the past when they've gone through different stuff. Um, and he shows her and like he's like telling her as a peace offering, hey, you can drive the car. But she's so mad at him that she's like, no. Because she's like, no, I don't want to drive the car. I don't like she doesn't know who's gonna be in the front seat. It's sort of like as like, I need you. And he tells her, I need you to drive the car. So I don't know if like The Rock was also an indication that like he's making a promise to her, like we are going to talk about it in the car. That's why I want you to drive, kind of thing.
I don't know
Like,
if I'd want her to drive about based on what they're going to talk about. She's likely to get emotional, and
or not just
I
being
wouldn't want
like,
to be driving in a car, period,
or
for that
just also just
conversation.
being like, just letting her drive while goes into this
Okay,
guy,
okay.
while being like, no, you don't talk to her because she's focused on blah.
Or maybe it's that the two of them are going to talk on the drive and they're going to box him out.
Yeah.
But yeah, this has me very interested to see what India Donaldson does next. I think this would make a fun double feature with Janet Planet
Yeah.
because you have girls and their dad, a girl and their mom.
Hmm.
And I think that's you get to see and it's also the landscape of sort of the Northeast wilderness is a big part of both movies.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, I think that would be a fun pairing. And then Lily Collius. I don't know if she's gonna do any more movies, but I'll keep an eye out for her because I thought at 19 she gave a very strong performance, and I'm very interested to see what she'll do as with age and life experience
Yeah.
and the kinds of performances she'll be able to give then. Well, that was the Pop Cult Podcast, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you check out our show notes for important links, including to our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you're subscribed wherever it is you listen to podcasts so you'll be notified when new episodes of the show are up. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find that it's November now, and so we're kicking off a new series. We'll be doing a viewing series for Pier Paolo Pasolini, which starts on U.S. Election Day with Salo or 120 Days of Sodom, which I thought would pair perfectly on the occasion. We will also want to remind you that you can support us on Patreon, and we really appreciate when you're able to do that. We want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who donate at the writer's room level. They get to pick a movie every month for us to watch and review. No matter what level you become a patron, you'll get access to patron-exclusive podcasts. We're currently doing a series called Love at First Laugh, looking at romantic comedies. And the third episode of that will be dropping the day after this episode of the podcast drops. On our next episode of the Pop Cult Podcast, we will be looking at Catherine Breillat's scandalous romance film Last Summer and Green Border, a film about Afghan refugees stuck at the swampy border between Belarus and Poland. Until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching. Our podcast music was provided by thepodcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. Find your own free podcast music over at thepodcasthost.com/free music.